You can! You can still save us! Go! I can't do this alone!
We are talking about a supernatural dark fantasy in Charlie Steed's Werewolf Castle. You might say this is swords versus claws, a clash of medieval fantasy meets a classic horror monster. But a silver bullet is not an option for the Dark Ages. It is a kind of period piece set in a kind of quasi-medieval fantasy landscape, and we have a small village which has been ravaged by an army of werewolves, it appears, and this village hires essentially kind of 3 or 4 warriors to try and kind of go to the kind of local king or ask for help, and they are joined by a survivor in this village, and along the way they meet not only the werewolves themselves, who are led by this kind of charismatic leader, but other things as well, for example a witch. What'll happen? Well, you have to watch the movie to find out. So, is it Nights of the Full Moon, or is it just a Moony? Let's discuss. So, but there is actually another movie which had a similar premise, that one being Thor Hammer of the Gods, which also was a fantasy movie where it pitted kind of fantasy kind of warriors versus werewolves. But this is a low budget British production. Steed's, the director here, has had kind of a little bit of a mixed kind of record so far. I've enjoyed some of his stuff, but some of them have been a little bit kind of like hit and miss. And it's not even the first time he's done a werewolf movie. He did actually do the A Werewolf in England movie, which I did quite enjoy to a certain degree. So let's talk about, first of all, what I think works in this film. Now, you have to bear in mind, this is like a low budget film, but nonetheless, I do think they got some pretty good location shooting here, for example. We have this kind of medieval village, we have kind of like various kind of like caves, woodland areas, this small kind of mist-filled village, and finally a kind of a castle as well. And I've got to say, you know, they've really done their kind of work in regards to shooting locations here. Obviously based on a very kind of low budget, but I think it does try to have a variety of kind of locales here, mixing up the kind of the atmosphere to a degree. And I have to say, the practical werewolf suits, I have some mixed feelings about this. We'll talk about it in what doesn't work maybe. But I've got to say, nonetheless, it's nice to see some kind of practical werewolf suits, and I think the kind of the detail of the suits looks pretty good. You know, fairly kind of nice looking kind of werewolf masks and things like this. And also you've got other costumes as well, our kind of our medieval villagers, our knights and such. So, you know, for a low budget kind of scale, I have to say this movie, you know, is trying, I think, its best on its limited kind of budget here. There are some interesting characters. The one I felt was the most interesting character was this kind of like disgraced warrior who wasn't a knight. He's kind of like a rogue, so it gives it a kind of, they call him a rogue, so it kind of gives it this Dungeons and Dragons kind of sort of small party kind of vibe. We have 3 knights, a rogue, and this kind of like peasant boy. And he's kind of like the angry one, and ultimately probably the best warrior out of the bunch. But I think he was the most interesting character, and you kind of want to know a little bit more about him. And I would say probably the best performance in the movie as well. The movie is relatively well paced. It's not a particularly long film, and we do have a few kind of action kind of sequences through the movie. And there is some fairly decent camera work here. We have a nice kind of zoom shot there where one of our characters is kind of going into like a cave system, and the kind of camera kind of follows him through this kind of cave system, which I thought was pretty good here. And it's, like I've said, it's somewhat of a clash of genres. It's nice to sort of see what is typically a kind of horror movie villain versus kind of like kind of fantasy kind of knight sort of characters. Even though, you know, as I said, it's not completely original, it's not something you see all that often, so I do quite enjoy fantasy and horror are, you know, 2 of my kind of favourite genres here. So it's nice to have a kind of a melding of the 2, and it's, you know, it's somewhat of a kind of a fun, if throwaway kind of movie. Okay, so what doesn't work in this film? Yes, it is a low budget film, and unfortunately that comes with certain limitations in regards to you know, technical ability here, and it does kind of show, you know, that we don't get huge amounts of extras. There's not kind of lots of kind of like wide angle shots showing kind of like you know, the kingdom and things like this, and there are a few kind of shortcuts that the kind of the movie has to make. You know, I'm somewhat forgiving of a low budget production. My whole channel really is predicated to low budget kind of fare, but obviously for some people they may not be able to kind of see past that, and that's fine. It is what it is. It's a low kind of budget B movie. One of the things that struck me as a little odd in this movie is we practically see the vast majority of the werewolf scenes during the day, with the exception of the initial attack, which happens at night. All of the other kind of the werewolf scenes happen during the day, so it's kind of like, I mean, it's going against the law, which I can forgive. You know, we can kind of adapt things, and that's fine. But the problem here, on a practical sense, undoes some of the kind of the scary factor here, because it just looks like a bunch of people in suits. And the actors that they got to play the werewolves don't look, they're not they're particularly big actors, to be honest. So we have these kind of bunch of like probably less than average sized werewolves kind of running around, to be honest with you. And because it's all very well lit, it doesn't really look all that impressive, I have to say. Now, I was impressed that we have a number of them, but it undoes, unfortunately, some of the kind of what I think would have been good atmosphere here by having a lot of the kind of the action sequences shot in the day, in the kind of the light. But there's other things as well that kind of contribute to this kind of like ebbing away what would have been, I think, a pretty good kind of atmosphere. Number one, I think, is that, but also we have some, unfortunately, some dodgy acting from some of the cast here. Not all, but some of the cast here aren't the best. We get a lot of regular faces that we see in Charlie Steed's movie, his previous movies, and I've got to say, some of them don't fare as well as others. Second to that is that I think the dialogue here is like typical kind of fantasy B movie. One of the things that I think made Game of Thrones work is its naturalistic dialogue. You know, our characters seemed like real people. Now, dialogue isn't something that's going to cost you loads of money. It's not a budgetary issue. So this is where I'm kind of a little harder on a movie like this, because unfortunately it just kind of leans into sort of typical kind of like fantasy speak. Our dialogue seems very unnaturalistic, and as I say, when it's delivered against some somewhat questionable acting as well, it kind of just cheapens that effect. I would have liked to have seen a movie like this kind of overcome its budgetary restrictions by at least having some interesting dialogue, and it just kind of makes the characters look somewhat cliche, and it kind of goes into this like, it's not a kids film because we have swearing in it, we have gore, we have quite a lot of violence, but it has this kind of like made-for-TV children's kind of show vibe to it. And this is down to, I think, the atmosphere. The lighting, I don't think is particularly good. The acting, I don't think is particularly good. The dialogue is very hammy and kind of wooden, and it just doesn't feel real. So we have all those kind of things, and then we just have some odd decisions that are made on a kind of a practical sense. For example, our main bad guy, Werewolf, he's mostly in human form, but he has these kind of fangs that obviously to show you he's kind of a bad guy. But it's one of these tropes you see in a lot of B movies, where normally happens in vampire films, where the bad guy needs to kind of like show you his fangs all the time, because obviously we've paid to put them in there and we want to show them that he's got fangs. But it ends up he kind of like his mouth is always unnaturally kind of wide, kind of showing you the fangs and things, and you know it affects the actor's speech, and he's kind of wearing a dodgy wig. It kind of just looks a little crappy from time to time. And then we have just some kind of shots here that, like, when we get towards the end of the movie, we have our main kind of hero character, and he's sort of on this kind of tower, but then we see like modern railings kind of behind him and things like this, and it's just kind of like kind of, you know, spoiling the immersion here a little bit. On the ending as well, not the very final scene, I have to say I actually quite liked, but the actual kind of climax to the story, so to speak, the kind of the final confrontation, you might say, just has some quite poor scripting in it. Without giving away spoilers here, our protagonist character seems to be able to do something that he shouldn't, and we're given no explanation why he can do it. Again, you can have these things happen, but in a story we either have to set it up or we have to know why. If it's something that is out of the ordinary and he shouldn't be able to do, you can't just do it and then not explain it. You kind of have to, you know, at least give us some dialogue to say why that has happened. It doesn't, and again, I'm not showing you what it is, but he does something that they can we're kind of told that they shouldn't be able to do that, but he does, and then that's all there is to it. And then we kind of have our bad guys seemingly get the upper hand at one point, but then for some reason or another they just give it away willingly. You know, it just doesn't. Why would you do that? They've kind of got to get the upper hand at one point, and then because the script wants to, and obviously our kind of main character is wearing his plot armor, you know, they kind of give away the upper hands for no apparent reason. You know, it's kind of one of these films where I think the concept is pretty strong, but the execution is lacking here. Now, as I said, Charlie Steeds' back catalogue of movies, I've enjoyed some. I quite enjoyed The Barge People. I still quite enjoyed A Werewolf in England, although that does have some of the same problems. Although I have to say, I think that was a slightly stronger film than this one. But he has also done some quite sort of poor films as well. You know, there's a lot of low-budget indie production houses here in England. I have to say, Charlie Steeds is mixed. Some of them are just constantly kind of like kicking out poor stuff. This is maybe a touch better than some of the other kind of like the low-budget British kind of production companies I've seen. But nonetheless, I think this one is a little bit of a waste of an opportunity. It feels like it was somewhat kind of rushed through. I don't know if this was filmed during COVID, but I can't really use that as an excuse because I've got to judge it as it is on the screen. Overall, it is a below average film, but it isn't a terrible film. I think it's a worth watch if you kind of like werewolf movies and you want to see something with a different setting maybe, but it's not brilliant. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.